Hey everyone, Anark here, and this is another installment of Anark Abridged. The topic of today's video is the importance of the ecology. And I gotta be honest, I probably don't need to sell the base idea of the topic here. I think that there is a growing understanding that the ecology is incredibly important, that climate change is real, and that the climate change that's taking place is going to be disastrous. But I want to even further impress this upon you. Not just that the environment is important or that climate change is taking place. I will leave those topics to scientists and to people whose job it is to spread that information. What I want to do today is really talk with you about the fact that this is not just a scientific issue. This is not just an abstract issue, a problem that we have to think about and, settle upon state solutions to, but is in fact actually a revolutionary problem. So let me start by kind of addressing the basis of much of leftist philosophical and political thought. And that is that it is heavily based in labor theory. It is based in labor politics, unions, the organization of the proletariat, which is to say the working class, those who simply sell their labor to survive, those who exchange their labor for a wage. And the reason why I start with this is to say that what that means is the left tends to focus on labor issues or class orientation to a very large degree. And I don't think that that's necessarily wrong, but what I want to do is problematize that just a little bit. And in order to do that, I'd like to start with why that is the basis of much of leftism. So this concept of the labor theory of value actually has a very simple basis to it. And that is all value derives from labor. That is to say, though there may be many things in the world which we could say to have value, things gain more value as labor is dumped into them. And that is to say, things become commodities which can even be traded, which can gain a value, which can have a price, which could even be traded on a market by way of labor transforming them. So, you might imagine, for example, that there is a tree. Well, the tree just sitting there doesn't have value on a market. It gains value in measure to the fact that it is chopped down, that it is turned into planks, and that those planks are then either sold on the market as base commodities in order to be produced into other things by private entities, or are built into other things by the laborers themselves, and then those things that those planks are built into are turned into commodities and sold on the market. So this, this kind of at its basis makes a lot of sense, right? The tree doesn't transform itself into planks, and the planks don't transform themselves into a dresser or whatever it is that gets sold on the market. Labor does that. And so even though I could go much more in depth about this concept of the labor theory of value and how labor rests at the foundations of what value is in a capitalist society, and one might say in all societies, if you're a Marxist, for example, what I want to point out is that the tree must exist first. And I think that's kind of an important place that we are arriving in the modern era. And might I add, this recognition of the importance of the tree, which we must chop down and turn into planks, or I should say maybe not that we must chop it down, but that in order for us to make the dresser, we must chop down. The tree must exist first. That is a recognition that is coming into stark focus in the modern era as we approach climate collapse and ecological collapse, and the disaster looms in front of us. But it's sort of always been known by indigenous people, right? Indigenous people have always sort of had this recognition of the importance of place, of the importance of the natural world, and that we are simply an expression of that natural world, that we are not separate from it, that in order for us to exist, there must be that natural world, that the environment is sort of this mediating factor to all of our interactions. So the reason why, to a significant degree, that this problem has taken place is because we've sort of separated ourselves from that recognition, right? We have internalized this conception that humanity is separate from the ecology, that we are separate from the environment, that the environment is a sort of mass of unconscious, unfeeling matter, that it does not matter how we affect it. It is simply a sort of blank canvas on which we can paint. We are allowed to simply transfigure, reconfigure, route, reroute all of that stuff. And that is a morally neutral position. That our position as humans, as conscious thinking beings, is to exploit that physical world and to turn it into something which serves us. A big part of this is Enlightenment thinking. That is to say, the thinking of liberal philosophers. But it really has the history goes back a little ways. This idea that the environment is sort of this neutral space that we are allowed to exploit. More than that, that we are supposed to overcome that environment. And one can imagine how in a situation where you are trying to overcome a brutal environment that has precipitous hurdles to survival, that is making it very difficult for you to survive, and where there are predators, where there are natural disasters, where even building and maintaining shelter or getting a steady source of food, it would be easy to come to see the environment as the enemy, especially as you are progressing into a time where you are actually overcoming that environment, where shelter is now becoming possible to produce on a very large scale, where agricultural projects have become so standardized and so spread throughout society that you are now able to overcome that environment and produce food and what appeared to be prosperity for very large groups of people. You can imagine how in this era, the environment appears to be something that you need to conquer. We're all sort of set into this very indifferent universe. I would say it's indifferent, but it may appear even to those that are trying to overcome these cruelties, these apparent cruelties of the universe, that it is in fact cruel. That the universe is a hurdle that we have to overcome, and that in order to overcome that hurdle, we will have to conquer nature, that we will have to be bigger, stronger, smarter than nature, and that progress looks like conquering nature. Well, it will probably not be particularly difficult for me to convince many of you that can now see the effects of this mentality that this is not the correct way to look at our relationship to nature. And that this viewpoint has been disastrous. And not just disastrous for that nature, which we sought to conquer, but disastrous for us, disastrous for every being that is alive on this planet. It's easy to see how this sort of humanistic, progressive conception of the world would have appeared liberatory to people of that time. That what we were supposed to do is keep progressing towards better and better sort of exploitations of nature, so that nature no longer controlled us, but we became the masters of our own destiny. The problem is we villainized nature. We turned nature into an impediment, into an opponent. But I think really the foundation of what I want to say in this video today is that that is false. Nature is not the opponent. Nature simply is. It is indifferent. Nature is neither cruel nor kind, but indifferent. It is the foundation on which all things are built. And we owe our existence to the long process of evolution that brought us here. We arose from that nature. It is our mother in that sense. We were birthed from the womb of that indifferent nature. So it is not as simple as to say that we need to conquer it or that we need to control it or exploit it. It's not that simple. We are part of a complex, interrelated web of things. And this is not just a philosophical affair. I think that's what I really want to convey here. This is not just a loose philosophical abstraction. What I'm talking about has real impacts on the world. And our recognition of these facts and our approach to these facts really matters. It matters because it may literally spell the difference between different forms of society that we could produce. Whether we recognize ourselves as being part of that interrelated web, or whether we continue to view nature as something to be conquered, will determine whether we can stop this ecological crisis. So, I'm sure some of this sounds familiar to those of you, perhaps, who have read some theory, or may seem intuitively correct to some of those of you who are informed about ecology or the climate, or even just climate change. But let me kind of bring it back together now. Why did I start with the labor theory of value? Okay? Well, because the labor theory of value, what it's seeking to do is sort of find that material basis from which all things are produced. Where do they come from? And how can we base ourselves at the root of that tree and try to address the primary crisis which exists? And many Marxists, and even the anarchists especially of that time, basically said that labor was at the root of that crisis. And I'm not here to deny that labor is extremely important and that class issues are incredibly, incredibly important. I'm not trying to diminish that at all in this ramble. But what I want to say is that they're not at the root. You know, labor didn't create the universe, right? You know, we did not labor and the Big Bang happened, right? The universe simply proceeds as a system unto itself. We are the outcome of that complex system. We are the outcome of billions of years of elaboration of complex systems. And insofar as that we have tried to separate ourselves from nature, to view ourselves as superior to nature, that it is a thing that we must exploit, and that we are not, you know, we think of ourselves not as animals, but as like these special beings that stand outside of the ecology and must manipulate it to our needs. That is a primary crisis That is the one that is deepest at the root. And I think it's almost indisputable that that is deepest at the root. I mean, you can argue perhaps that labor is more able to be addressed by particular kinds of structures like unions or something, but you can't deny that there can be no unions, there can be no labor without a universe. There can be no labor without an earth. There can be no labor without an ecology or an environment. The environment is the foundation on which everything else must be built. And so our attitude, our approach to the ecology, to the environment is primary. It cannot be discarded as some philosophical abstraction. And I think what climate change has done is brought that fact to the fore. So I hope you'll allow me a little bit of a tangent here. But much of what we experience, the misery of what we experience as living beings, is that the consequences of our actions are all tied up in feedback cycles that are so much bigger than our conceptions that they're really hard to conceptualize. And those feedback cycles act far outside of our cognition. And they lead us to being deprived. They lead us to feeling alienated. And as we progress more and more towards understanding larger and larger feedback cycles, we progress toward being able to understand the world better and therefore act to change the world in a better sense. In that sense, it might be said that, Marx and this class analysis and this labor-oriented analysis was us understanding feedback cycles much, much bigger than ourselves, ones that perhaps did not seem quite as obvious as they did before the 1800s. And I've argued before that there's an even bigger analysis, and you can see this in my videos such as Power or A Modern Anarchism, parts 1 and 2, that the even bigger feedback cycle is power, right? How power moves. But as I hope that I've intimated very clearly in all of the videos I just listed, is that power is nothing without an ecology, without an environment in which it is embedded, in which people exist. If there is no world, no stable world for us, then there is no power, there's no movement of power, because there is no beings, there is no place for us to be. And so what climate change is that bigger feedback cycle, the one that we were not able to understand, to cognitivize, right? As the limited beings. It is this bigger feedback cycle of importance, demonstrating its importance to us. And that in a very significant way, the ecology functions like this. It functions on these very large scale feedback cycles, feedback cycles that will take thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years to process through some change. The ecologies change gradually through slow adaptation. And not only slow adaptation, I won't get into all that. There's rapid changes as well. But many of the most important changes in ecologies take place over very long periods of time. They have feedback cycles that span extremely large eras that are far outside of human cognition. Climate change is the birds coming home to roost, right? It is a feedback cycle that is much larger than we were before the modern science able to immediately cognitivize. The importance that foundational strata of existence, the environment, did not demonstrate itself to us until except in this very sort of delayed way. It took a long time for those very real effects to begin impacting us. And it should be said, there was a long time really even since the early 1900s, where scientists were beginning to say, hey, you know, the usage of fossil fuels and desequestering a bunch of carbon is probably going to be bad, because that's going to change the consistency of the atmosphere, which is going to change the amount of heat that transfers through the atmosphere. And that is going to cause problems, because chemical processes take place by way of different temperatures, and that will increase or decrease. They were kind of, at the very beginning, sort of uncertain about which one it would be, those temperatures. So we've known for a while that this was going to happen, but here we are now living in a time where it's no longer under dispute that these feedback cycles are now impacting us. Not only do we see the proliferation of natural disasters, right? We see that there's an increase in the number of natural disasters, but we are now beginning to see things that are perhaps even more devastating. Things like a diversity collapse, that entire ecosystems are breaking apart, that keystone species are disappearing. We are beginning to witness real impacts of how the ecology is shifting. Our drinking water is becoming poisoned. The wildlife which surrounds us is decreasing its complexity. It's becoming more simplified in a really bad way, a way which is destroying the complexity of that environment. Plants and animals of all kinds, we see a decrease in diversity. And as ecosystems decrease in diversity, they become more fragile. I think what I would want to really help you understand here is that the ecosystem is not necessarily just going to correct itself. That these collapses actually lead to an ecosystem that is less capable of correcting itself. And what that means is, insofar as we're trying to locate that primary struggle, the struggle on which all other things must be predicated, I think it's really clearly coming into view that that struggle must be a struggle around the environment. Without the struggle around the environment, there can be no struggle around anything else, including the struggle that I focus around as an anarchist very much, which is the struggle about distribution of power. How does power flow? There is no power if humanity doesn't exist. The environment is an incredibly important issue. It is basically second to none. And what that means is, in the coming era, the environment is going to inform a great deal of our struggles. The way that the environment is changing, the way that power structures are orienting themselves in the environment and affecting the environment will absolutely be incredibly important. This is not going away. This is not one of those, issues that's going to come and go. Okay. We will be, as anarchists or socialists or communists of any kind, we will be pushed into an eco-anarchism or eco-socialism or eco-communism. All different facets of politics will be forced to address the ecological issue. Everywhere it's going to pop up, because everywhere in our lives it's popping up. So what that means is more and more of our struggles are going to be predicated around how these actions are affecting the ecology. And they're going to become less and less abstractions to people. Do you understand? As people's literal drinking water is being poisoned, as enormous plumes of burning chemicals loom in the overhead, as they watch their local ecosystems collapse. those issues are going to become more and more primary. Those are going to enter the forefront of their minds, and for no small reason, because the impacts of our actions have arrived. The indigenous way of thinking is being vindicated. Okay? And if we cannot reconcile with that fact, if we cannot conceptualize how we will address these ecological issues, how we will orient ourselves in a new movement that conceptualizes a transformation of ecological relations. If we can't imagine how to transform ecological relations, if the vision we present to people does not have the potential of transforming ecological relations, we are screwed, because this isn't going to get any better. This environmental problem isn't going away. So there's a lot to talk about on this issue, and I plan to do a few more follow-up videos on this topic of the ecology and how we are going to have to approach the ecology as radicals. What orientation must we take to be revolutionary in an era where these ecological problems have come home to roost? I think in the meantime, of course, you can go watch my Anark Abridged on social ecology, and that will at least start to give you a start on the answers to that question. If you would like, also go over to Catalyst Compendium or Audible Anarchist and listen to some introductory essays on communalism. Go read the work of Murray Bookchin. Those things will get you started on the right answers. However, for today, this is what I wanted to talk about in this video. This is where I wanted us to start. I plan to return to the topic of social ecology and communalism and an eco-anarchism, and I will probably do that in the next video. If not the next video, then probably one of them that is very soon. But that's it for today. That's what I wanted to say. I hope you all take this very seriously. This is an important issue. It affects everything. Literally everything. Anyway, so if you liked the video, go click like. And if this interested you, if you thought this video was important, go subscribe to the channel. I'll be producing these every single week. They release on Friday. If you would like to support the project that I'm doing here at Anark, go become a patron at my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Anark, ANARK. All of those donations right now go towards me living and me moving towards doing this channel more full-time. If I can do this channel more full-time, expect me to transition into also doing short video essays and live streams. If you'd like to see that, you should go become a patron. Regardless, you should go comment below. Tell me what you think of this issue. Ask questions. And for those of you for which this issue is very important, please go below and try to answer some of those questions. I'm a limited person. I cannot answer everyone's questions. Regardless, I will try to get to a few of you as I can. And I appreciate you all for watching. I think this topic is incredibly important, and I hope you all agree with me. Anyway, I'll talk to you soon.